Hello, everyone. I am Iya Afo, the Director of Training and Development for the Arizona ACES Consortium. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope the school year is off to a fantastic start. And welcome to the third part of our Supporting Wellness series. And this installment is about healing emotions and resetting genetic expression. Um, a lot of this work is based on research done by Dr. Michael Yellowbird, who is an indigenous professor that has done a lot of research in this area. And I love the work that he's doing because I feel like it's so important that whenever we can incorporate day to day activities, instead of always putting our mental health and behavioral health in the hands of someone else, I feel like it allows us to take agency. It allows us to take ownership and accountability and have some level of control over our mental health and behavioral health. So I love to bring to you different activities, ideas, and thoughts about how we can incorporate basic day to day activities that will improve our mental health and our behavioral health and help to regulate our brain. And in doing so, we're able to show up in our lives, right? As parents, as siblings, as friends, as mothers, as fathers, as grandparents, as educators in the school, we're able to show up in our roles in a way that allows for us to have healing centered interactions, right? I'm always thinking in my mind, what would happen and how can I make sure that every interaction I have all the time is a healing centered interaction? And imagine what kind of world we would live in if every time we interacted with one another, it was a healing centered interaction. So, some of these practices will help us accomplish that. So, um, at the top of our list, and it's not the first time I've talked about this, but movement, right? We talked also about movement in the seven circles of wellness, but movement is at the top of the list for how we can help to heal emotions and reset our genetic expressions. And so we're first going to talk about running. We might be familiar with a therapeutic modality called EMDR. And so with EMDR, they talk about how helpful that is for healing trauma and especially healing specific events for trauma. EMDR was developed because there was a psychologist at Stanford University, and she was going through a particularly stressful time. And in between courses, she would go out and walk the beautiful campus there. And she noticed that when she came back, she would feel so regulated and she would feel so much calmer. And so there was research done about this. And what we found out is that when we are in what's called optic flow, so when we're running, walking, or riding a bicycle, we have these very rapid lateral eye movements. And those rapid lateral eye movements help us to regulate the brain. And that's what the EMDR technique was based on. But even without having an EMDR specialist, therapist working with us, we can still um, activate that same rapid lateral eye movement that regulates the brain. And so, running is one of those activities that's very, very helpful in healing emotions and resetting genetic expression. Running helps us with to delay gratification. Running protects us from depression, helps us focus, increases our brain cells, and helps us to produce those lateral eye movements that helps to regulate the brain. Dancing. Dancing is one of the most powerful ways, believe it or not, but dancing in unison is one very powerful way that we impact our neurological system. It increases our endocannabinoids, it enhances our mood, it protects us from depression, and increases our brain cells. Singing, I talked about singing before in our last video when I talked about the ridiculous songs that I sing when I'm driving in the car, blasting my music, or at the gym when my granddaughter is not with me. But singing is found to be one of the most beneficial activities for the brain. It increases endocannabinoids, which helps with sleep. We talked about sleep in the 7 circles of wellness, mood, appetite, learning, memory, and decreases pain. Singing also decreases stress and anxiety. It helps our memory. It protects our brain function. It reduces pain. Can you imagine all of these things around singing? Singing is really a fantastic activity to add. It's easy, right? You can be singing in the shower, you can be singing in the car. You have all these opportunities for singing, and there is great neurological benefit to singing. And we can incorporate it into the classroom, so we get the kiddos singing, and we're all regulating our brain together. Sleep, again, right? We talked about sleep, the importance of sleep in the 7 circles of wellness. Sleep is another, there are people that argue, right, that the amount and type of sleep we get is even far more important than the food that we eat or how much movement we have. Laughter. I know we've heard this before, how beneficial laughter is, but I want to bring it up again that laughter is very important for the brain. So we can increase laughter in our own lives, but also we can bring it to the classroom, right? Bring it to our kiddos, bring it into our family lives, into our personal lives, and in however many ways possible, right? But laughter is a very powerful tool for resilience. It protects the brain. Listen to this. It increases memory and learning, right? How can we incorporate laughter in the classroom? It increases memory and learning. So laughter is one of those things that is very, very important in regulating the brain, in calming us down, and increasing memory and learning. Something that's called adaptive stress is very important. And when we think about adaptive stress, we can think about things like the sauna, cold plunge. If we're tribal, we can think about sweat lodge. All of these things are adaptive stress, and that type of stress challenges ourselves, our cells, and we have disease protection. It gives us longevity. And then there's even discussion around, specifically research around cold plunge, that one of the reasons that cold plunge is so effective is because the way the brain is wired, the pleasure center of the brain or the pleasure pathways and the pain pathways are in the same area, okay? And the body is always searching for equilibrium. In the addiction pathway, we feel neurologically dysregulated. And so we're trying to do something to regulate the brain. So maybe we go and use drugs. So if we use drugs, that would increase or activate the pleasure pathway of the brain. When we activate that pleasure pathway of the brain, the body says we must have equilibrium. And so the body activates the pain pathway, and we perceive that as craving. And once the pain pathway is activated and we have that painful craving sensation, again, we want to activate the pleasure pathway. And so back to drugs, the body says equilibrium, we've got to have equilibrium, and it activates the pain pathway, which we perceive as cravings, and we get caught in this cycle. Well, with adaptive stress activities and specifically discussion around and research around cold plunge, is that when we think about those same pleasure pathway and pain pathway being wired in the same part of the brain, with cold plunge, we're activating the pain pathway, right, through plunging into that cold water. We are voluntarily activating that pain pathway, right, versus activating the pleasure pathway when we get caught in the addiction cycle. But with adaptive stress, cold plunge specifically, we are activating the pain pathway ourselves, and the body responds by activating the pleasure pathway. And so it's said to be, or there's some research around when we voluntarily activate that pain pathway, and the body follows by activating the pleasure pathway, we're able to sustain the regulation for a longer period of time. And that's one of the reasons that cold plunge has been so successful in decreasing stress and, neurological regulation, so forth and so on. And we've heard a lot about it lately, right? We heard people building these chambers, cold chambers or cold plunge pools into their backyards or right next to their pool, or manipulating the pool so the pool gets cold so people can jump in the pool and do that cold plunge first thing in the morning. And that's supposed to help with pain and decrease stress and anxiety, so forth and so on. So adaptive stress. So far, activities that can help us heal emotions and reset our genetic expression, movement. Specifically, we talked about running and the importance of being in optic flow. Then we talked about dancing, singing, sleep, laughter, and adaptive stress. Also, fasting and intermittent fasting for a long time. For spiritual purposes, I did fasting for a long time. And people would say, how terrible I am and how unhealthy it is and so forth and so on. But every religion you can talk about, every spiritual practice you can talk about has some element of fasting in it. But now intermittent fasting has become very powerful. And what we know now is that intermittent fasting helps the mind, the body, contemplation, and genetic changes. It increases focus and changes genetic expression and allows for healing. And that's specifically around some of the epigenetic things that go along with healing. And next, we have going outside in nature. We talked about land and connection to nature in the 7 circles of wellness. But again, when we're outside and we're doing things outside, it increases our brain processing speed and our cognitive resilience. So if we think about cognitive resilience, we're talking about our capacity to overcome stress. So doing things outside, being outside, learning outside, running outside, exercising outside, all of those things are very helpful for increasing our capacity to overcome stress. So let me run it for you again one more time in case you didn't get it or you want to write it down. We have several activities that help us to heal emotion and reset genetic expression. In other words, allow for healing some of our epigenetics. And that includes running, dancing, singing, sleep, laughter and humor, intermittent fasting. We can add meditation, adaptive stress, and being outside. All right. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you again in our next segment. Bye bye.